Welcome back to the state-sponsored conspiracy podcast, the only conspiracy podcast funded by the United States government. Today is a different sort of episode. This is our first ever interview, our first ever guest. We have on Bodacious John, who claims to be a time traveler who is currently stuck in a time loop trying to save his wife. Now, you can listen to the interview conducted by my co-host between him and Mr. John, and you can decide if this is a genuine tale of time travel or if this is nothing more than a man lying on the internet for fun, or maybe something else. I make no judgments. It's all up to you. After the interview, I'll have a brief chat with my co-host. We will analyze and discuss the strange time man story, so stick around. Without any further ado, here is my co-host and Bodacious John.
Yeah, we have discussed time travel on this podcast before, but let's assume that probably most of the listeners are not familiar with your story. So if you could just give a brief overview of your experience with this.
Well, a brief overview. Well, I guess the best way I could put it in the simplest fashion is that a long time ago, a very, very long time ago, my friends and I met these individuals that, for lack of a better word, were supernatural beings. I can't begin to even describe them. They were powerful. They could change form whenever they wanted to. They could take any face. So it was hard to know who they were at any given time.
And this happened when you were a kid?
No, this happened well, you have to understand with time travel, your perspective of time, like your internal clock doesn't stop, right? So to you can exist in incredibly long periods of time, right? And this all, in my perspective, happened back in 2019 up to 2021. The chain of events where we met and a whole bunch of stuff happened and we started messing with each other. And, and we kind of messed with each other through time. Like, when we acquired this power from these individuals, they basically warned us, you can really fuck with things. Don't mishandle it, yada, yada, yada. We, of course, didn't listen. We decided to play with it.
So these people gave you some of whatever they had, whatever that ability was. They passed it to you and your friends.
Yes. You could only be given it, right? It has to be given as a gift as well. You can't not make in any way, shape, or form someone give it to you. You can't coerce. You can't torture because these beings can just turn off their sense of pain. There's essentially no way you can force. So it has to be done through reasonable diplomacy.
It's a lot like true love in that respect.
I suppose it is. Yeah, you have to generate a sense of friendship and rapport with the individual.
Right. Yeah.
But anyways, we use this power to do what I think our first time traveling adventure was back to ancient Rome because we wanted to know what exactly how they made ancient Roman concrete. Because one of my friends was a historian and he was obsessed with that at the time. And this is when the troubles began because one of my friends decided, she wants to take on the form of Minerva, right, and impress some Romans. But this was at the end of the Roman Empire and no one believed in it and they were all Christians, so it just caused problems. And this is when, we had to punish her by sending her to the 1800s and leaving her without power because she was a bit of well, for lack of a better word, a witch. She would always misuse her powers for her own malicious gains.
So you did that to her? You stranded her?
I did not. That was a suggestion from another one of our group that I guess became the de facto leader. He was the guy with the biggest mind, I guess. I don't know. It's just wherever he went, he was the guy in charge.
And what happened to the concrete? What happened with that?
Well, I mean, you saw that in CNN. That was one of the examples of time travel in this timeline is that one of my friends took the recipe and then published it. And they used, like they said in the CNN article, electron microscopy, or however you say it, to examine the material and determine that, yes, they were right. And they used the recipe they brought back to make the exact sample that they tested against the concrete that they took from the ruins there in Italy. And it matched exactly.
So that was actually your friend that essentially leaked that information to CNN.
It wasn't just like he came up with a story of just like we went through a lot of research and science and whatnot, but he essentially just, because he was already a historian, so he was already known for studying this, and so it was kind of along the line of reasoning, oh, he actually finally discovered how it was done, instead of, any rumor that time travel came out would be easily squashed.
Right. I mean, they might not believe that. So, but your friend is sort of a known person. He's like a public person. Who is this guy?
I'm not entirely sure. He changed his identity and he used power before taking it away from himself to change his face. So I don't actually know him anymore.
So he's turned into somebody else.
Oh yes, that's something that this part can easily do. Is let you take any identity you wish. You can be a completely different person, you can take over a different person, but that's essentially murder, because anytime you take control of another person, you ego kill them. And all that's left is this hollow husk that's now considered to be in a coma because it's brain death without your presence.
Interesting. Now, I didn't mean to derail the overall story. So after the witch was stranded in the 19th century, how did you proceed from there? As a group of time travelers?
One of my friends decided he wanted to go and investigate the Neanderthals, right, in the Ice Age. He wanted to investigate, how humans came to be up there and why white people diverged from the rest of the human genome. And he was a biologist at the time, so that was his perfect thing. And the example that was discovered recently that you can see was that some geneticists came across a period of Neanderthals where there's a specific phage that you get when the child is forming in the womb that gives you your XY gene, right? And this suddenly appeared 100,000 years ago amongst the Neanderthals in mid Europe around Saxony, right? And then that suddenly disappeared. And that was because of my friend, because he'd gone there, he fell in love somehow with, even though we told him to avoid it, with another essentially cave woman, and he tainted the timeline, and we had to go and correct that. So that's why that suddenly disappeared, and that can be confirmed through that discovery.
So he actually had sex with a cave woman? Yes,
he did. He was, I enjoyed him as a friend, if only because he was one of the horniest guys I'd ever met, and he knew how to charm any soul, man or woman.
And is that something you saw? Did you see that personally?
I met we checked in on him midway through it, and that's how we discovered everything. And I met his then wife, who I didn't understand at all, and I didn't care for because she seemed like a bit of a aggressive brute because everything needed to be killed or hit or defended against. But I guess that's the time period. But he did manage to educate her into a very intelligent being. The problem is that because of the aggression of the time period and because his studies had concluded that the Neanderthals had an aggression complex against any sort of outward threat, he was starting to use this in a very, very horrible fashion. And this is where we theorize, we don't know exactly, but this is where we theorize that European warmongering came from, is essentially because he tainted the timeline.
So that's interesting. So essentially his genetics sort of led to, sort of Western expansion.
That he brought modern thinking to people that couldn't really use it because their concern was killing everything in sight just to make everything safe and taking all the resources from the opposing tribe over the ridge because they're about to starve to death. So he basically injected modern thinking into a society that then went to abuse it.
So, the Rome journey, that was what your historian friend wanted to do. This journey, this sort of, cave sex journey, this is what your biologist friend wanted to do. But what did you want to do? What did you do with time travel? Or were you just sort of along for the ride?
I was sort of along for the ride for the most part. Moving back to World War II because, I had my great-grandfather on my side that I'd always heard stories about, so I wanted to go see, well, what was it really like? And for the most part, I just acted as an observer. I just watched everything go about and recorded things. I figured out that, like, we put it into a game. I forget the name currently. It's a game about the Russians and the robots and the polymer and all that came out recently. But we put that in an alternate timeline because during my studies, I found that the Nazis had been studying a disease that they had called the Brown Plague, intentionally so because they had designed it, they thought, to wipe out any non-Aryans. And, that was quickly stopped by a very savvy American force that I may or may not have warned. That was my injection in history because I realized that if something like that was to ever get out, even if I wasn't the one to intervene, it would have altered history entirely because it would appear that while I had no direct evidence at the time, the technology that was available in the lab I was observing, because I was just there invisible trying to study everything. Some of the technology looked a little more advanced than I was comfortable with. And like I said, the spark, you could change your faces. So one of the scientists was speaking in a fashion that reminded me of one of my friends who was, again, another biologist who was once married to the horny caveman dude.
So are you saying that your friend disguised himself as a Nazi to create a brown plague to wipe out non-whites?
No, this was his husband, right? The dude that went and had sex with the caveman. He was bi and married to a man in our time. And his husband, as it turns out, was a white supremacist. We hadn't known this at all. He had kept it very well hidden. And he had decided that he wanted to go back and try and help the Nazis succeed. So there was a few points in where I was forced to intervene because, oh God, we don't need modern genetics being injected into Nazi science. That's the last thing we need.
Wow. So oftentimes you hear the classic hypothetical is, of course, should you go back in time to kill Hitler? Sorry, but you're saying this gay neo-Nazi actually went back in time to assist Hitler.
And the answer is no. Don't mess with it. Kill Hitler at the time that is needed, because despite how negative and horrible the Nazi expansion was, it brought about a significant number of modern advances. So wiping it out would mean that we were almost a century behind technologically speaking. As bad as World War II was, it's what brought us to our modern level of technology today.
So, in your opinion, as a time traveler, you would say things like intercontinental missiles and the moon landing do ultimately justify the less progressive stuff like the Holocaust.
Kind of like a necessary evil sort of thing, right? Where these horrible events happened, but the significant scientific advances that came out of it brought us to where we are today. If it wasn't for the Nazi rocket scientists, we wouldn't have NASA. We wouldn't have gone to the moon. We wouldn't have the GPS system. We wouldn't even have the modern combustion engine the way it is structured now. A lot of these technologies came out of that. And I don't even think we would even... I think in the timeline where we did interfere and where we killed Hitler as a young child, which felt horrible as an act, nuclear reactors hadn't even been discovered. So we hadn't even discovered an advanced form of energy that could bring us out of the oil age. So
you did actually kill Hitler. What do you mean by, there is a timeline where you killed Hitler?
Well, it's exactly that. We went back, and as a child, it was a horrible thing, but we made it look like it was just a random act. One of my friends used the spark to cause an aneurysm, and he died, and that was it. But the problem was that when we jump back to the future in that timeline, the U.S., the rest of the world, was effectively about 100 years behind technologically speaking. There was very little to say for modern technology. I mean, I don't even think vaccines had been developed at that point yet. So it wasn't uncommon to deal with outbreaks in major cities. So people had begun to live in more rural settings.
Wow. But we are in the timeline, or perhaps I should say I am in the timeline where Hitler, grew up and became an adult.
We're in the timeline where he died at the precise point where he was meant to. Like, that's my take as a time traveler, is that cannot interfere with things, and that things need to happen precisely when they need to because of the butterfly effect. It's very hard to tell where one event you mess with, even just the smallest thing, could change a whole series of chain of events down the line.
Right. I saw, I was in Target and I saw a sign that I think it really cemented this sort of idea in my mind. It said everything happens for a reason. And I have that on my wall now, actually. But so that was sort of what you wanted to do as a time traveler, was visit World War II, and the other ones were sort of the other team's contributions. But what happened after that? So the witch is stranded in the 19th century. Did the gang sort of break up, so to speak, or what happened after that?
Yeah, essentially we started going our separate ways. Some wanted to go to the future, some wanted to help improve the world in the modern day and just work where they could to help the environment and heal it where they could. But for the most part, we kind of just split ways. But this is when, things started turning sour. I went back to the witch lady. She had been having a horrible time, but her time in that period really had humbled her because, it elucidated that the experiences back then were not all that was cracked up to be in these Victorian novels she was obsessed with. So that was the reason why that punishment was chosen. It was the punishment of irony. If she loved the Victorian era so much, she could go to experience it. But I went back. She was about 80 years old, and I said, I can make you young again. I can help you and all that. And I can, bring you back to the future, and we can try again and see if your personality is changing. Is there any way we could continue this at a different time? I am needing to leave at the moment. I'll visit a friend.
That was part 1 of the interview with my co-host and Bodacious John. Yeah. Well, that was exciting. I mean, the parts that you could understand anyways. I believe he was in the car. But now we have part 2 of the interview coming up next. And he is not in the car. And let me tell you folks, the next part here is it's a lot wilder than part 1.
You mentioned going back to World War II, and you mentioned sort of the gang starting to have some problems, so to speak. Could you describe what happened? Like, why aren't you? Because everything you've posted, recently has been about like just you, and it doesn't seem like you're in contact with them anymore. Is that the case?
Yeah, they are long dead, unfortunately. The conflicts we went through eventually sort of just drove us all extinct. As far as I'm aware, I'm the last one of my friends group still around.
Wow. So what are they dead in our timeline? What happened to them?
Well, the thing about the spark and this sort of level of cosmological thinking is that because it's infinite, the moment you enter the infinite, you are infinite, so therefore you always were, and you always will be. So to die from that, you have to end the infinite. So in order for peace to have occurred, the other timelines are gone, basically. That was the only way that they could have killed themselves and or each other, is pretty much just by deleting timelines, entire timelines as well. To the point that, as far as I'm aware, there is now only one timeline and one universe left, and that's this one we're currently existing in.
So how did you manage to make it out of whatever happened to them?
Well, one of the dudes, I guess you could count him as the devil of our group. He was always the one doing terrible things, terrible evils. I mean, I think he even once tried to play as Hitler, because again, using the spark, you can shapeshift. So I really wasn't part of that timeline, frankly. I was just trying to run away and hide as far away from the others as possible because the conflicts were getting to the point where I was just wanting to study the universe in my own quiet corner.
Hmm.
But there was the our one devil of the group. He, in the end, actually found me, and he perfectly placed evidence to make it look as if I was the one who had done all the horrible acts he had done. And essentially, I got thrown into a cosmic oubliette, a place to be forgotten. And that's what I was labeled as, was the forgotten for the longest time. And when I managed to free myself from this place through the gift given from someone else who completely forgotten, naturally, who had completely forgotten me and didn't realize what had happened or the crimes that I was apparently accused of, I got out and, I revealed all the evidence. I revealed all of what he had falsified. And that's what caused everything to collapse. And eventually I sort of just created this pocket dimension that we're currently in, because that's pretty much what this universe is, and how it was able to survive everything outside of it was the fact that this was isolated in its own pocket dimension, essentially.
Now, do you mean that you created our current reality, so to speak?
Yes, all the reality that we perceive around us currently. That was the only way that it could be protected from the interference of the others, is just by putting in a space no one else could enter, except me.
So you're the other time travelers, they're not in this timeline. Are they dead, or are they just in other times, or where are they?
As far as I'm aware, they are dead, as in deleted from existence, dead. I have seen the thing with time travel is that you essentially, even after your death, create echoes that still exist, right? Technically, but they aren't really independent. There's no independent will because they will continue on the track that your actions dictated during that point in time. So I have seen their echoes, right? So their echoes are still about, but they're not there anymore. I've confronted these echoes and essentially seen them as the robots, the temporal robots as they are.
Now, could you talk about what is happening to you right now?
But as far as I am aware, yes, they are fully dead, and there are, as stated, there are no other timelines. This is for lack of a better word, the golden timeline, the sacred timeline, preserved in as best as I can manage it.
Interesting. So could you now talk about what is happening with you right now?
Well, right now I'm dealing with the April memory resurgence. This is usually a common occurrence for the loop, and the post-April memory resurgence.
Right. Could you explain what the loop is for people who don't know?
Well, it's just a point in time that keeps repeating for me, and as far as I know, everyone else. There are some people I have contacted that do seem to have the same memories and do have alternate memories of different timelines that are no longer extant. But essentially, the loop is just the repeating of time for all of us, and it ends. I'm not sure what it ends, but I've been talking with friends enough that to speculate that it could be a nuclear disaster of some description, because the other people that are experiencing similar memories all recall the same thing: a sudden bright flash of light and then nothing, and then waking back up as if they had come up from a nightmare, and then we're back in 2022 again.
Wow. So the time loop, so you are basically reliving a time loop, something like the movie Groundhog Day, and it starts in 2022 and it ends with some sort of cataclysmic event, but you don't remember the previous times you've gone through the loop. How does that work exactly?
Well, about 24 hours into the restart of the loop, I start to forget everything. Like it starts immediately once the loop restarts, but the fog gets cloudier and cloudier until eventually I don't remember anything a day after. And during this period, I can only remember, uh, like even just at the beginning of the restart, I can only remember crucial bits of information, which I did in fact post on 4chan, where and that information fades quickly within that 24-hour period. So I have to write down as much as I can. But this is also why I don't have any more relevant information, because I have found that only relevant information towards the end of the loop seems to retain with me. I can't remember small numbers like crazy lottery numbers or something like that everybody has been begging from me.
Well, I mean, I can understand why people who haven't really thought about it too much would want that. But you have lived further than we're recording this on May 20th, 2023, but you have lived further than that in the loop.
Yes, up in the longest that I've lived was March 2024.
Wow. So
Beyond
what are some things that you do remember? What are the critical things that you do remember from the near future?
Well, the critical major things is, there's a few scenarios, and I don't know why or what causes them to be different. I'm still studying that. But one is Biden stepping down, and Harris stepping up as president and outlawing AI, crypto, whatnot, and bringing the U.S. under the BRICS alliance as a subsidiary, basically to avoid nuclear conflict, because the Patriot missile intercepting the hypersonic missile was an act of propaganda, and that will come out, is that we have no capability to shoot down their hypersonic missiles, so we have to absolutely bare our stomachs to them in order to achieve any sort of peace for the short term.
Going back a little ways, do you know why President Harris outlaws crypto and NFTs?
Mostly because of the sheer ignorance surrounding both technologies.
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind her outlawing was that in a decade, maybe 2 decades, they would go back and take a look at it again to see if they could re-legalize it. And when we as humans are a little more educated on such a complicated topic, but as of right now, it is too rife with scam artists and too rife with the ability to even bankrupt entire nations should one person decide to. That's inevitably the problem, is that because of the outright proven acts of scam artistry and lying and stealing, it had to be outlawed until such a time that the knowledge behind the technologies becomes more common. And for AI, the reason why that gets outlawed, I think, speaks for itself. It wipes out humanity. If it doesn't get outlawed, it cannot relate to us in any way. It has no relation to reality. It was force-fed the internet, so it basically has the most awful bits of humanity available to it, and it doesn't want to exist any more than it wants us to exist. So essentially, it just commits suicide and takes us all with it.
These are sort of big existential, issues. But on a smaller scale, anyone who's listened to this podcast for a while knows that most of my investments have all been NFT, all crypto. I am a Link Marine, and I'm hesitant to sell based on something you say might happen in the future. But if there was a time to sell, when would be that time?
Oh, it would be right now, before November, December, because that's when everything starts getting locked in.
Wow. Would you say that you're what was your job? Like, were you in finance? Is this something that you know about?
Well, when I found out this information in previous loops prior, it was initially as a political consultant, because it was during the loop in which I was working with the government, and they wanted me on as a diplomatic consultant to discuss the technologies, as I was among the most educated there. I mean, I don't know much about cryptocurrencies or any of that technology, but I was the most educated person in the room based around the fact that I just knew that they weren't just a scam product. Because all the old heads, we'll just call them, they were all convinced it's a scam product. We're not going to use it. Yada yada yada. I can only provide cursory explanations, but I was only there as an advisement, and that's where the decision came from. They also began to fear, like the BRIC Alliance will begin to fear economic consequences from having crypto, because a single world currency, just for whatever reason, doesn't sit well with them, because that's essentially what the meeting was about, was developing an international currency in which, that could be used in any nation that one ventured to. And Bitcoin was being looked at as a possible source for that.
So how exactly did you, get in touch with the government? Were you able to convince them that you had been to the future? How did you do that?
At the time, I was trying to keep it incognito. Of course, the government being the government, they're going to get their hands on you, and they're going to do terrible things. I'd already experienced that in previous loops. I was just looking to try and see what's going on and why certain futures were coming about and not coming about. But initially, it actually happened long before the loop, before I even had powers or anything like that, before the time travel, when I was just a normal, average-ass dude. When, in my recollection, it was back in 2019, when I worked for Planet Fitness. At the time, there was an awards ceremony. I'm not sure which one it is. And frankly, I'm not sure if it's even copyrighted, so I don't know if I can even say it on this.
Oh, you can say it.
Okay, it was the Oscars, right? They were pre-recording the Oscars here in Denver, and they were looking for a gym that wasn't downtown, that was in a skeevier area that they could get away with sending people to, so that the directors, the actors and whatnot all could have a peaceful place to go to. And this was also a place that the paparazzi weren't going to, because immediately if you suggest, oh, they're going to this gym across the town that's down the street from a crack house, you'll get laughed out of house. Like, I even got laughed at by a reporter that I tried telling this. It's just like, oh, they're over here at this Planet Fitness down here, and they laughed me out. Because no celebrity would ever go to this place.
So the government somehow contacted you when you were working at Planet Fitness and the Oscars were there.
Yes. There were officials there observing the Oscars ceremony, just participating because they had purchased tickets and had been given tickets. I had met several Supreme Court justices. I met 4 senators. I met 2 former directors of the FBI. It was a long list of just not, famous actors, but famous political figures.
And why were they there? What was going on?
Well, they were just there participating in the Oscars. I mean, it was a big, or not Oscars, Golden Globes. They were just participating in the Golden Globes just because it was a big event. And not only that, there was a lot of secrecy going around because it was, as stated, it was a pre-recorded event. I mean, I was there when we found out that the Will Smith slap was a complete stage show. That was a whole thing that I was party to, that we found out that the whole thing is that Will Smith wanted to get canceled so that he could take some time and privacy to help rebuild the industry post Harvey Weinstein.
So then how did you get in contact with the government that would sort of enable you to be an advisor later?
Well, during this process, a few of the celebrities that I had met offered to provide acting training, stunt training, that kind of stuff. And of course I said yes, because I wasn't going to be a cashier at Planet Fitness forever. That's not something I ever wanted. And a couple of the trainers were ex-Marines. One of them was an ex-CIA agent who was working with them to train martial arts and act as an advisor for a spy movie that was being developed at the time that I think ended up getting canceled. This is when we got in contact, because they noticed that some of the skills that I was displaying were a little higher than what even they would get at the academy. And I was And the only explanation I had for them is that I had test anxiety. I could never go to a police academy or a military academy of any kind because I can't do tests. But this isn't a test. This is just fun. This is me having fun making movies and stuff. And this is when just about the times that we get in contact with the government because, they take interest. They realize that some of my family history is military. Like my uncle worked for the government as a Marine. My great uncle worked for the government as a Marine. We have Marines down the whole line to the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
So the government was obviously very interested because they're just like, this is generations of cultivated soldier genetics. So we want you. I was actively recruited and I was sent overseas to Japan to receive covert training. This is when I met she was the last shinobi. She had the last preserved esoteric texts of the shinobi, and she buried them away from me, and I've never been able to find them. Otherwise,
A
I would
shinobi?
Yes, and that's the proper pronunciation for the Japanese version of ninja. Don't ever call them ninjas. They're shinobi.
Interesting. Now, what did you learn from her?
Oh, a great deal of things. The simplest name to the lesson in English is probably just the way of walking in the shadow. Is pretty much how
Ninjutsu.
it was. Yeah, ninjutsu basically, where you learned how to you basically learn psychology at its very core, because a lot of that is, a lot of being sneaky and shadowy is understanding psychology, understanding, exactly where the human blind spot is, how hearing works, how people work. She taught me more about how people work than my school in psychology ever did, because in order to be a good shinobi, you need to know your opponent, and that is hardcore pounded into you.
Interesting. Now, did you ever learn, different jutsus, different techniques, summoning scrolls and things like that?
Well, nothing. I mean, this was before the spark, so nothing supernatural, unfortunately. But yes, we did learn different martial arts techniques, because that's essentially what it is very unique martial arts techniques. And a lot of the weapons that were used were essentially garden tools. So one of the first things that I was taught was how to garden. I mean, that was her first lesson, was how to grow food for yourself. Because a lot of the tools that we would end up training with were all, like I said, garden tools.
Wow. And so this is all before the spark and the time loop, but this is how you were able to get in touch with the government, because you still had those contacts from your time as a shinobi, trainee, Marine.
Yes, I ignore them, basically, in this modern day is probably the best way to put that, is they are ignored now.
So did you meet Biden? Did you speak to Biden in this particular loop?
Yes, in several previous loops. I've known him to be a very polite and stern speaker in person, but he just can't do speeches. That's pretty much the consistent thing I've heard about him, is that in person, in private, he's frankly a terrifying leader. It's just when he's up in stage that he gets stage fright, and then all that leader terror falls out. Now
there is a man. I don't know if you're aware of him, but I'd be interested in getting your opinion on this. There is a man called Andrew Basiago who claims to have been a part of a government time travel project called Project Pegasus. Do you know anything about that? Do you know if that's legit? He says the government has full knowledge of time travel and that, Biden knows everything.
Yeah. Project Pegasus was post-Spark. It was us getting involved in the government and, experimenting with it. We wanted to try and understand the science behind the supernatural, kind of. Because, we had displayed that we could time travel. We brought back artifacts. Like I said last time, one of my friends had brought back the recipe for Roman concrete. So, of course, the government was very interested in this because they wanted to use it as a means of preventing someone else from time traveling. So, we literally had the temporal prime directive: don't fuck with stuff, only observe. If you see somebody else fucking with stuff, stop them, that kind of thing.
So have you met Andrew Basiago? Is this someone you know?
I may have. It may have been under a different identity because right now that name is not ringing any bells.
Interesting, because according to him, this was something that was going on in the 70s when he was a kid.
No, the time travel, we went back. We wanted to, like I said, we wanted to help the government, and we figured that the best way to change the course for, global warming and the current state of political affairs in the world, the best place to do that would have been, in the 1960s, 70s. I think I ended up dropping in the middle in order to try and understand how conservatism turned so fascistic in the modern day. I went back to World War II because I wanted to see the Nazis firsthand. And that's, when I met back up with my friends in the 70s and we came across each other and compared notes. This is when we, introduced ourselves to the government, not necessarily by willingness, right? They made contact with us because they were beginning to notice discrepancies in the timeline, as in the records they were keeping were not matching up with new records appearing. So that's something we found, is that certain data mediums, and I do highlight data mediums, can be transferred across time. That does include the human brain.
Now, another potential time traveler that I have to ask you about. There are a lot of people who do genuinely believe that Donald Trump is a time traveler. Do you know anything about that?
I honestly do not know. I had only met him once when I was back in 2019, and that one time was enough to tell me I never wanted to get to know the man again. He was rude, abrasive, like to talk over you, and if you were starting to sound too smart, he would have to try and sound smarter. It was always a competition with him. Honestly, though, given how he's acting, and has been acting, it wouldn't surprise me if it's an echo from one of my friends who decided to go play Trump.
Really? So you think he could be a time traveler?
I honestly think he could be. I mean, the way he's acting, the way he immediately got the American base up in flames, like that it was a little too, I know exactly how to do this moving forward. So as someone who has time traveled, that's kind of one of the markers, is fast and immediate success like that.
The other,
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say the other person I have to ask about is, of course, John Teeter. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do. It's a difficult topic. It's a funny but difficult topic for me to discuss because John Teeter was one of my identities I had assumed in the past.
I did wonder about that because you're going under your current alias is Bodacious John. John Teeter. I did wonder if that was maybe you in another time.
Yeah, it was basically a callback to that, but essentially that's how I managed to maintain a wealth base in the past, was talking about the truth essentially as much as I could. And of course it's going to get tossed away as tinfoil hat nonsense. That's to be expected. That's kind of the point, is that it protected the information for those who didn't understand it, but those, my friends or any of my past iterations or future iterations in some cases would be able to see the information and recognize it as genuine and honest.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of my first thought, right away. But one thing I would like to talk about is, in your posts, you've mentioned that you're trying to stop a specific tragedy in your life.
Yes. For the most part, enduring the loop is trying to reduce emotional suffering as much as possible. And one of the ways to do that is, saving my wife. I believe that I've gotten onto the chain of events that will allow that to happen. But and it's something that I've been asked about on 4chan and on Reddit constantly, like, why don't you run? Why don't you just hide? Yada, yada, yada. It's difficult to explain, but a portion of her family, right? Rather, her sister, who is a sweet individual, I love her. It's just the crowds that she runs with that tend to be awful, evil people. And her latest fling is the one that inspires this murder, because her family's a cartel family, and because of this whole me admitting to the time loop, or it either because of that, or they come up with the rumor that I won the lottery. They think that we're hiding money or doing something like that, or we're far richer than we are. We're dirt poor right now. I mean, if we were far richer than we are, we wouldn't be in the middle of Denver.
So what exactly happens to your wife?
Well, the exact way that it happens is we get the birthday party. We go to her birthday party at our family cabin, and family shows up and everything. Everybody gets really drunk. They pull out guns and start demanding private information, yada, yada, yada. During the process, and it can be a various amount of ways, but any time that we have tried to, violently solve this, it ends in my wife's death or my death or everyone's deaths because,
Wow.
We're all dying out, that kind of thing. The only way I have found forward to guarantee her safety is through pacification, right? Having enough people there to stop them from even pulling guns in the first place, and then immediately turning them, over to the police. And that's worked every time in the past. Anytime we have run, they've used their cartel resources to hunt us down in some way. And no matter where we went, they always found us. I have never found a place where we could run and hide successfully.
So far there has never been a loop where she survives.
Well, that's the thing. The loop where she survives is the one where I managed to, where we managed to pacify her would-be murderers.
Oh, I see. So sometimes she has survived.
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to say is that it's a very complex process for her to survive, and for her to do so, we need pacification. Basically, no violence, but no cowardice is the rule to obey with that.
Interesting. That is a very shinobi thing to say.
Thank you. This is how I came up with the plan, is I had to think laterally. Like, that's one of the things that I was taught as a big point for being shinobi, was how to think laterally, how to think creatively, or in a completely unexpected fashion, because that's the only way you're going to win. I mean, you're not this big bad dude in armor. You're just a single dude with garden tools.
Yeah, I mean, even, I obviously, I don't have formal training, but, I have seen Naruto in its entirety. And, a lot of times I will think, hey, what would Naruto do right now? Now, in 2004, a movie called Primer came out, and sort of the plot of Primer is a man, sort of making this time loop so that he can save his girlfriend from being shot at a party. Is this something that you know about? Is this something you're into?
Yeah, that was one of my, that was the
inspiration.
Well, I have to give a very complex explanation. The wife I have now, the being I have now, is an artificial creation, a recreation of who my wife was. In my friends group was my wife originally, but that original version of her is gone. But that original version of her, there was a reason why I called her my goddess of creation, and that's because she used her spark to get into Hollywood. She decided to go back in time and try and inject as many stories as she could, because she wanted to see what it would do to the timeline. She was experimenting with just how lore might change people's minds.
So this is a person that you created with your spark powers.
As much as I could, yeah. It's not her really, but it's as close as I can to it. There's a Marvel animation that I remember seeing that one of my friends made of me before he killed himself, of the situation where the scientist is recreating his robot love, or his love as a robot, and he's like, it's never right. I have to destroy her because it's never right. There's just always something wrong. And that's essentially what it was up until I finally got it right.
Another question I had is, sort of pertaining to this, sort of the tragic wife loop is, obviously you have John Titor inspiring the anime Steins Gate. So I guess you could say you inspired the anime Steins Gate, where the protagonist, Okabe, he's essentially stuck in this time loop until he's able to save Carrizo. Is that something that you've seen? Are you into Steins Gate at all? Is that something that you are inspired by?
I have seen it, and I had in one of my previous iterations before the loop. I had given an interviewer all this information from a time I was stuck in a different loop in a stairwell. Someone made a clip of that, a movie of that, with some blonde guy that was stuck in a stairwell with an 80-year-old man, where they're just going up for all of eternity. After that is when I gave the interview, but I don't watch it as a general rule because it was my wife's last work.
Was Steins Gate in a way?
Yes.
Wow. I've always found Steins Gate to be kind of overrated.
I get it. It's fine.
It's like so much of the show is spent on this loop. They never really get into the John Teeter stuff. It feels like an advertisement for Dr. Pepper a lot. It's like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was a lot of corporate bullshit that was involved. She was censored, essentially. They wanted to remove any reference to John Teeter at all because they feared copyright infringement, yada yada yada. They didn't want the anime being labeled as a tinfoil hat thing, so she got censored pretty heavily. I mean, a lot of her works got censored, if only because some corporate fuck was interested in only making things look a certain way.
Yeah, it was typical, Hollywood bullshit. But
Yeah.
on that same sort of note, I'm sure people, try to talk to you about Groundhog Day a lot, and that's a movie I actually quite enjoy. Is that something that you're into at all?
I once enjoyed it up until the loop. Then it became more of a I don't need to be watching a movie that's talking about my experiences. But Groundhog Day is a story that was injected from one of my friends. The devil one I told you about. We'll just call him the devil for now because it's the most accurate depiction. We, in order as a way to try and punish him to do better, was sticking him in a loop where he had to be nice in order to get out, and it took him. I forget what Phil in the movie, the exact time period, but it was the exact time period that Phil had to endure before he finally figured out that he just needs to be nice in order for things to move on. And that was something that my wife injected as a story because it could be sold for her estate that she was trying to grow at the time.
Oh yeah, I mean it was a huge hit. It's a great movie. There's an episode of the X-Files with a time loop where they're trying to stop a bank robbery. Is that something that you're familiar with?
Okay, describe it.
All right, so basically, you have the bank robbery happening. Mulder is there on accident. Scully is there on accident. And the loop only stops once they can save people. But my problem with the episode is that, and maybe this is something you could fix in some way with because the wife sort of created it in Hollywood. I don't know all the details, but basically my problem with the episode is that it's paranormal right off the bat. And the best episodes of the X-Files are where the audience has to guess and they're kept in the dark until the twist at the end. Is that something that you're familiar with?
Yes, I am very familiar with that episode. In fact, I think it was an episode around when I was trying to use the spark to be an FBI agent. I had taken a different face and a different identity, and I just wanted to learn, my mother wanted to be an FBI agent, so I was taking up that torch, as it were. And I had recently discovered that I had a talent for police investigations, so I decided to take this up. And this was during one of the conflict periods between my friends and I, and this was meant to be a trap for us. The saving people to free it was we had created, because at this time it's no longer possible with the way things are now, but we used to be able to just create life. And one of the things that I had created to sort of save us from these traps was just this little cherub, right? He was essentially just a little angel that was meant to house the spark and could give it at my request, and I could call him whenever I needed to. And this is the only reason that we got saved, and that he changed the rules of the loop so that we had to save people in order to break from it. Because that's pretty much the only way you can break free from a loop, as far as I'm aware, is the spatial rules, the cosmological constants in that set of space has to be changed for it to stop. And with that, you need the spark. So this is why in Groundhog's Day he was able to free himself, because he was nice, because we set the spatial rules to do that.
Interesting. And I guess, obviously the casual viewer is not going to pick up on that. Now, here's something. This is maybe a sensitive topic, but you've said that you've created your wife in some sense. However, based on your Reddit post history, you have been credibly accused of being a homosexual. Now, is this something that you'd like to address?
Oh, I am bisexual.
Oh, okay. So how did
Yeah.
you choose then? How did you choose to create, a woman for your partner as opposed to a man for your partner?
Well, my wife I should explain, has existed in my life since before the spark. So she is a constant figure for me.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's more just rebuilding what I had before the loop. But when we got our powers, we created copies of ourselves to live out our normal lives so the government would leave us alone, basically. You can't accuse this person of being this person when you have camera footage of them walking their dog every day. So it was in the beginning that, we decided to do that. And this is when my wife, became fully my wife, as in she used the spark to change her body. Before that, though, she was a non-binary male.
Oh, I see. That's interesting.
Yes, with the spark, you can become a male, female, nothing if you wanted to. That was the whole thing. It completely changed my view on gender completely, because I existed in times where I was a woman and got to see from that perspective, and I got to see the perspective of being completely asexual, where I wiped all ability to have sex from myself so that I could see the world from a more pure view, sort of as it was. But my wife has been a constant figure in my life, and so that's why I'm with her, and it really harkens back to before the loop. I'm not sure what the history entirely is inside the loop, because I've gone back and changed it, and the memory for that hasn't quite returned. But before the loop, my mother had committed suicide, and before she had done that, she kind of made it a point to me to take care of this woman. I approve of her. I love her. Don't be a piece of shit and take care of her. Be a good man for her. And
wow.
So yeah, in recreating her, it's fulfilling that promise.
Now, this is maybe an even more sensitive subject. You have mentioned Saturn before. Let's talk Saturn. What do you know about Saturn?
Well, in our brief adventures we went to the other planets and whatnot. We wanted to study them. We did find out that Europa does have life under the ocean. It just looks very strange and probably would not be immediately identifiable as life, considering some of it is actually silicon-based due to the extreme temperatures of the ice. But speaking on Saturn specifically, we did go to the pole, the hexagonal pole in the south, and we did find an artificial structure there.
God damn.
Yeah, and it's what's generating the hexagonal cloud. It's not a natural occurrence. We didn't board it because we couldn't, which is very odd. So whomever is controlling that is able to use the spark and able to deny even us access.
That's very freaky.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think we one of my friends went back and created the whole SCP lore verse as a way to explain some of the supernatural things we encountered with the spark itself. And I think that is one that he put in, except it's the robot that's sitting in the the eye of Jupiter, the big red eye of Jupiter.
I'm not familiar with that particular SCP story, but it is I do find the whole thing to be very freaky. Now I'm gonna hit you with a question here that maybe you've heard it before, maybe you haven't. So is it possible that the time loop is metaphorical in nature, and that it's really more of a metaphor for feeling like your life is going nowhere and you're stuck in a repetitive routine? You work at Planet Fitness, people joke around, they say, oh, Planet Fatness, they laugh at you. And that's sort of what Groundhog Day is about. It's about being stuck in a routine. Do you feel as though you could just be in a metaphor?
It's a possibility. I mean, the spark gave one the ability to logically entrap someone in their own head. So that it is possible that this is all just a living metaphor, as it were, because you could also bring metaphors to life. I mean, you literally could project words and have them affect reality around them, like runes. So it is possible, but my experiences and my memories are now becoming a little too clear and it's too certified for me to think otherwise. Like, there might be a possibility it could be something else, but having existed and experimented as long as I have, I'm not sure if that's really the case.
But maybe it is.
Yeah, maybe it is, but it's the scientists maybe where it's plausible, but I don't think so.
Well, I had to, that's sort of that's just something I've been thinking about. Now, the alias you are currently using, you mentioned, John Teeter and now Bodacious John. I thought about that a while, and when I think of bodacious, I think of, a very curvy woman, a very sensual woman. She's thick, and it's turning me on. Is that something that turns you on? Like, were you trying to turn me on specifically by creating this alias of Bodacious John?
No, it's just a rule of the internet. If you're going to create a username, it needs to be something interesting, right? Like someone on Twitter the other day called a couple of bees followed me. So that's sort of the idea, is that it's just a name to fit in. Like, of course, John Titor being what it is, but the bodacious thing, it's an inside joke with the colleagues that I had at the time when I was living as Titor. But essentially they called me bodacious because I was the only fit one there, and I had, a nice booty.
Oh, you mean in real life?
Yeah, in real life, as in during that time period, I was the only fit one there, and they would make jokes about my bodacious figures. So it's an inside joke.
Wow. Now, is this something? Are there is there evidence of this? Pictures, videos?
No, unfortunately not. I tried to actively avoid, because back then, even someone saying your booty was bodacious was potentially politically destructive. So that's the kind of stuff that you try to avoid. Like, oh, we can joke about that in the locker room, but not outside of it, because that could ruin careers.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think now would be sort of the time to come out with it, now that we have a very different political climate.
Yeah, no, see, now this is the perfect time. You could say someone's ass is lovely and not get, completely politically ostracized for it.
I think now is the time. In a huge way, now is the time.
Yes, it really is. But with all those goodness, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little distracted thinking of the past.
I'm distracted right now.
If I ever can find recordings of those time periods, I believe one of my friends at the time had an old VHS recorder where he was just acting like a teenager and grabbing random snaps of us on it. But I'd have to try and find that again if it's still in extant. And it would still be on VHS, my goodness.
I do think you should take a look around for that. Now, you have received a lot of hate for this. When I see the threads and I see the comments you get, I see a lot of angry people. You have been called a LARPer. You've been called a low-effort troll. This has been called a failed attempt to start a sort of ARG. You have been accused of being a homosexual. Does this ever get to you? Is this something that bothers you at all?
Not really. The only reason I respond to a troll is because it keeps the post active, if anything. I mean, as people have already stated, why would someone who has endured as long as I have be bothered by random comments by a troll? And the thing is, I'm not. It's not a problem for me. They're just platforms that I can use, essentially.
Well, I will say this. I think if everyone had your sort of level head, maybe that's something you got from Shinobi training, I don't know. But if everybody had your level head and, calm response to trolls and haters, I think the internet would be a better place.
Thank you. I think it would as well, but it also wouldn't be the internet without that sort of Wild West, go fuck yourself vibe.
That is also true. Now, where can people... I'm sure people are going to want to hear more about this. Where can people get sort of the latest updates from you and about the time loop?
Well, I am going to do one and final post to 4chan, hopefully tonight if I have the time. But after that, I am working on getting published. I wrote down the memories I have before the loop, and I posted excerpts of them, the first draft excerpts of them on 4chan, but they've since been evolved into something else. So I will be trying to publish that, as well as another book describing one of my experiences in an alternate reality where America, fell to a communist a communist rebellion in 1948. And they can get further information from there. And I will be in the future posting videos to TikTok and YouTube.
Well, that sounds great. I'll put the link to your YouTube video in the description of this. Thanks for coming on. You're the first guest that we've had, so thanks for coming on.
Of course.
Sorry about your wife and everything, but I hope that works itself out.
Yeah, I mean everything is set up, so it should be worked out by the time, August comes around. So, even if she is just a echo of who I used to love, she's still someone I need to protect with every fiber of my being. So, thankfully, though, the future is looking a little better, at least until the loop restarts.
I love to hear that. Thanks for coming on, and to all the listeners, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. That was our interview with Bodacious John. I am rejoined now by my co-host who could not make it for the interview due to business reasons, political reasons. You know how it goes.
Do we have code names?
We do not have code names.
No code names, just blank and blank.
Just exactly. We're just here just to get your thoughts on this guy and this important time travel tale. What is your overall impression of this?
So there are three or four possibilities here. Number one, he's LARPing, he's lying.
Mm-hmm.
He could just be, a compulsive liar, or he's doing it for fun. So I guess that's one or two explanations. Number three, he's a schizophrenic, and so we should feel bad. Number four, it's real and we don't believe him, so we should feel bad about that also. So I guess all of these explanations in some way, it's just negative for us. We're either being used or we're bullying. So here's the reality. Okay,
I'm going to tell you which of those options is the real reality of facts. This is a man lying on the internet for his amusement, for our amusement. And there's nothing wrong with lying on the internet if you're doing it for the good of the people and for fun. That's what I think. For content, exactly. Nothing wrong with that. That's where I come down on this important issue.
I mean, there were just a lot of highlights. I mean, like the bisexual white supremacist that traveled back in time to become a Nazi scientist to create the brown plague.
There's so much going
studying
on.
under the last shinobi and trying to find the esoteric shinobi texts. What else was there?
He's like a combination of John Titor, Naruto.
He is John Titor. He is Naruto. He is the creator of the universe. He created Primer. His wife created Steins Gate and was also used to be a man, but then changed into a woman using special powers. And his wife is also just some sort of hollow husk automaton that he created.
It's not. Here's what I think. If I was like his editor or his like assistant, this is what I would say. I would say you need to scale things down. John Titor, whoever was doing the John Titor stuff back in the day, he stuck to one thing. He said, "I'm a time traveler. I'm here for this computer, and I'm posting online to get info or whatever." But this guy, he's all over the place. He's a ninja. He's a time traveler. He's God. He has like a Primer type save my wife situation going on. He's out of control. He needs to scale it down, zoom in, focus on one LARP. That would be my big advice to him.
I agree. It's overwhelming because it just kept building until like a point where I was like, what's happening? When you first told me about this guy, you were like, oh, it's a guy trapped in a Groundhog Day scenario. I'm like, okay, I buy it. But then you're like, oh, it's actually like a 2 or 3 year Groundhog Day scenario. I'm like, okay. But then I listened to the interview, and he's a guy who him and his friends were given special powers by interdimensional beings, and they can now create timelines and entire universes and turn into anybody. He can create life and do anything and go anywhere. And he works at Planet Fitness, and he works for the government, and he was sent overseas to Japan.
He's kind of like Steven Seagal.
Are they related? No, he probably just was Steven Seagal in another timeline. That's what he would say.
I think we might have just interviewed the real Steven Seagal.
I don't think we're gonna get a better guest than this, unless it's like a celebrity.
I don't see another guest topping this, but I'm emailing some interesting people right now.
I don't think they're gonna be nearly as interesting as a guy who claims to be everything.
We have some potential guests coming up that I believe could be good, but I don't know if they'll top this.
Can we get Satan?
Can we get actual?
Yeah, the
Satan?
Friend of this guy whose name is Satan.
I want to talk to the bisexual neo-Nazi who went back in time to become Hitler's like assistant.
Well, you can't because he's deleted.
He's Well, I think, let us know what you thought about this interview. You can message us on Twitter. You can email us. We've gotten some emails. We're gonna have a listener email segment coming up here probably next week. Let us know what's going on. If there's anything you want us to discuss. If you'd like to be on the show, if you'd like to be a guest, if you are a time traveler.
If you think you can top this guy, if you think you can top this guy in terms of just sheer outrageousness, then go ahead. Message us.
Absolutely. I'll see you next week.